Is technology a help or a hindrance in your business today? And we'll be explaining why more is not always better, and being better can get you more. This is the Philip Gagnon Show.
This is the #1 podcast for real estate brokers and leaders. You're listening to the Philip Gagnon Show.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Philip Gagnon Show. As always, I'm your host, Philip Gagnon. With me today, I've got a very special guest. He's a longtime friend. He's a philosopher, an entrepreneur, an author, speaker. He's done everything, a modern day Renaissance man. With me today is long friend, Matthew Ferrara. How are you, Matthew?
Great. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. So you're based out of Las Vegas, correct?
That's right. We moved here about 7 years ago. I'm originally from Boston, so you might hear that accent still there.
A little bit of that wicked accent.
That's right.
Well, it's great with modern technology that we can do this podcast from several thousand miles apart.
It's fascinating. It's one of my favorite things about technology today, all the opportunities it creates for us.
Absolutely. So in case there are people out there that are not familiar with you, would you mind just giving us a quick little bit about your background and some of the stuff that you've done over the last 30 years?
Sure. I mean, I've essentially spent 30 years in professional development. My career has brought me to different roles and training in sales, technology, management, leadership training. And I've had an opportunity to work through some of the transformative periods in major sectors of our economy, in finance and real estate, specifically sort of my home base industry, if you will. And it's been always focused on how individuals and organizations can learn to tap into their talents, use all of these amazing developments, and remain vital and central to the key relationships with their customers, with their peers, and with their communities.
Well, that's wonderful. So you and I met, was it 12 years ago now or 15 years ago, something like that. And I think you were doing a presentation about technology and how it can help and all that kind of stuff. And I think it was about a month ago, I saw a post that you had put on Facebook that resonated with me because I had been feeling the same thing. And the post, to kind of summarize, was about being able to connect with the people that provide you services. Like you had brought up the idea of being able to book a flight based on who the flight crew was, or being able to reserve an Uber based on the driver or that kind of a thing. And I loved that idea because I had experienced that with an Uber driver. And I said, it'd be great if I could request this guy tomorrow when I'm leaving, going back to the airport. So how do you see technology kind of facilitating or replacing some of these relationships or engagements?
It's an issue I think that everyone is struggling with, even the inventors of these new technology platforms. I think that one of the opportunities we have with these technology platforms is to expand the number of connections we make, but the sort of jury is still out on what the best way to do that is. Now, traditionally, we sort of bookmark people who do good by us. So we have a favorite professional for cutting our hair, or our dentist, or our attorney, or even in the old days, our favorite driver who would pick us up to take us to the airport. And what's happened with a lot of technology lately is it's sort of replacing those relationships with a different value proposition. So instant versus trusted. And I think that, it tries to be trusted by introducing ratings and rankings and things like that. But I do think that we're still working out which is the better path. Many times I love the fact that I can use an app to get instant help in certain ways. So I can instantly reserve a table, I can instantly book a flight. But on the other hand, when things really matter, I still want to have trusted. I still want to have those relationships or experiences I had before that drive maybe what we call loyalty or drive, safety and security. So I do think that we're still fumbling through that. Personally, I think that that's just another opportunity. How cool would it be for us to be able to take something like a ride sharing app and not only get the benefit of instant, but be able to look at the last time we were in that city and the last person who did drive us, and at least try to request that person first if they're available. I think that would just up the value of doing a good job. It would be great for the driver. It would be great for the app because I'd be even more inclined to use it than I already am. But it also, I think, would reinforce the idea that technology actually isn't replacing relationships; it's enhancing relationships, and that's something that as we get excited about these new techs and we jump forward with them, we often don't think through their best version. And so maybe we're just sort of working towards that. And as a side note, I think that that's pretty normal. It's okay with these new technologies to start just with the basic case, which is there an easier way to do A or B or C? But then they ultimately should be asking, is there a best way to do these tasks as well?
So, with the rise of the gig economy, there's now so much more choice, especially in these sort of transactional situations. We almost need the ratings, but are we putting too much emphasis on them, or relying too heavily on them versus, as you mentioned, a personal interaction?
Yeah, I do. I've always been a sort of reluctant fan, if anything, of ratings. I was recently looking at some old articles I'd written, and one of them actually was about resisting ratings because I don't really see the best work being reduced to 4 stars or 4.5 stars or 4.75 stars. Sometimes the best work can't be described on a scale. It could be that what made the transaction really valuable to me had nothing to do with the actual rateable activity that someone took. I think about when I moved across the country. If I looked at my real estate professionals' actions, they might have earned a very high ranking, but what really mattered to me wasn't that ranking. It might have mattered some emotional quality or some other personality trait that doesn't always get captured by those scales. So I do think it's important we start to expand the way that we are using these kinds of apps, and we change our criteria. I personally think that there's sort of a missing piece. It would be great to be able to say, I really love this person for all of their traits, not just their scale. And there's just one flip side to that, which is I do think we have to be careful not to dehumanize this. I think that many things that technology can do well, such as efficiency or speed, should not come at the cost of dehumanizing the relationship. I find myself sometimes sitting in an Uber of a 5-star rated driver, but I'm not having a better experience because of it. I might actually be having a worse experience than just someone completely randomly selected. Or if I could catch up with the same person who drove me the last time that I did have a good conversation with, and I can further that conversation, further that relationship. So we do have to remember that ultimately there are people using all of these products. And so ranks and ratings are helpful, but I don't think they're sufficient for how this should really help the gig economy grow, and how it should also make sure that these are more than just transactions, that these are people getting a chance to have interpersonal experiences. I don't hire a vending machine, I hire a person.
So I want to go back to something that you mentioned a few minutes ago, which was you said, I'm paraphrasing here, but you had said that when it's something that's transactional, having it be quick and easy and anonymous is good. But if it's something that's important, then having a relationship and having that trust is there. And I think that's sort of the big thing that, if I'm understanding what you're saying, is trust, and that you don't have that obviously in somebody you don't know. But once you have that relationship, you have that trust. And so if we look on a broader scale, as we're trying to Tinderize or Uberize everything in every relationship, I mean, where does this end? Where does this go?
Well, I think it's a philosophical question. I actually don't think that everything should be Uberized or everything should be resolved into an application. And I see this all the time. I get these invitations that say, join this webinar to learn how to Uberize your business, learn how to deliver service or grow your business like Amazon. Well, the question we always have to ask ourselves is, what is the appropriate model for our business? Now, there might be some businesses where copying Amazon's model is brilliant. If I was sitting here and I were selling objects, I was selling things, and I just needed to mass produce those things and store them in a warehouse and ship them as fast as possible, then I might want to copy Amazon's business model. But the truth is that not every business works that way. I work a lot with service professionals. So again, looking at my home base of the real estate industry, I don't necessarily want an Uber-like experience. I don't want to randomly pick someone and then have them deliver through an app an experience that is tied into a massive part of my human element, right? My identity is tied into moving. My personal sense of place and space and meaning are things that shouldn't just be reduced to all of these models. So an important question for all businesses, but also just us as a society, is that where do these models fit? And then where are they're mismatches, right? So maybe what should happen is someone needs to start developing technologies that allow us to sort of have what we used to have, that trusted Rolodex, if you will, that trusted address book, that group of special relationships. And maybe it could expand those relationships, or maybe we can find new ways to stay more tightly connected to those relationships. I think that would be a new form of creating opportunity in the marketplace. And it would also, I think, be a more satisfying way for people to do their work and to maybe in some ways just have better outcomes, because they're not worried about volume. They're worried about the quality and the long-term nature of those relationships.
So, what if we go to the other extreme and talk about a company that I personally I have not heard about in a while, but that was at the forefront of kind of the opposite of this, and that was Zappos. And for a long time, they were a leader, not because of their ease of use or anything else, but because of their customer service, and they thrived on that. So, how do you see that fitting into sort of today's model of on-demand, right now, humanless interaction?
Well, so this is fascinating that you say that, because Zappos, of course, is headquartered in Las Vegas. And frequently, when I am working with clients, I will just fly them in and say, we're coming to go on the Zappos tour together. And I don't say anything. I let them just experience the tour, because I continue to believe that Zappos does have a very good quality balance between ease of access. So sure, I can order millions of products, not just shoes anymore, from their app, but they also have internally a philosophy that is all about the relationship. So if you go on the tour and you watch how their help desk works, for example, and it's personally, wonderful to watch these roles that we now sort of take for granted, like a help desk or a service line, excel at creating amazing experiences. So they have no time limit on their calls. They give each of the call center representatives a small budget so that they can use it to create delight or go above and beyond, not only necessarily returning a product or replacing the product, but maybe adding in a little extra within that budget. They have a famous story where I think the longest call was 13 hours or something. It was a nonstop, like crazy relationship that was
That's a
developed.
marathon.
Yeah, it's truly a marathon. And but what I've noticed is that there are companies who are trying to sort of combine the best of both worlds. Zappos, of course, learned that what customers want is one part of the relationship to be ease of use and one part of the relationship to be amazing experience. And you can see that in many fine organizations. There are hotels which I stay at, very, very loyally because I can quickly reserve them on my app. But once I step through the door, it's no longer about my app. I don't use my phone to unlock the door or to order things by text. The rest of it is still managed by face to face, person to person experience. And ironically, some places like hotels or airlines, if you fly them enough, you do get to know the people there. And it's so funny how that remains as critical to me in my selection process and the service fulfillment process as just ease of use or not having to take my credit card out, that sort of frictionless concept. It really is not an either or model that I think will be victorious in the future. It will be a yes and model, if I could use that phraseology.
So it's kind of doing both, using the technology to facilitate a relationship.
Sure. And
Yeah.
and all of us sort of know that intuitively. We feel that sometimes we just, I remember just recently saying, I just want to pick up the phone. I just want to talk to someone for 5 minutes and get it all right. And when that happens, you're still delighted because you're using a 75-year-old piece of technology to be fully satisfied with whatever need you had or whatever desire you had fulfilled. And then there are other times when I say, you know what, I don't want to have to make a phone call to do something simple like book an appointment or change an appointment or order a simple product. So I do think it's a little more than just either or. I do think it's an opportunity that a lot of companies might have just swung the pendulum too far in one direction, and now they have to inch back just a bit. And by the way, I talk to service professionals all the time who have also reported that this is something they've sort of individually discovered. I'll tell you a real quick story. I was working with a company in Colorado recently, and they were describing how they actually had ramped up all of their online advertising and prospecting business, and it was generating a lot of incoming inquiries, new business leads, et cetera. And after a very short time, they actually ramped it all back down. And I said, well, why would you do that? Why would you turn off this flow of new business? And they said, well, the truth is that we would receive maybe 5 or 6 inquiries on Monday, and we would get to talk to 2 of them, but 3 would be lingering in the background. And then on Tuesday, 5 more would come in, and we would talk to 2 of them, but now 6 of them are lingering in the background. And Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. And what was happening, they said, was we actually were overwhelming ourselves. We were becoming almost nervous wrecks with this constant flow of questions and inquiries, and it was actually impacting our ability to build relationships and do good work. And what we discovered was that more wasn't the right model. Better was the right model. And we went back to saying, let's make sure we realize that for every time we get an opportunity to meet with someone new, we want to create a long-lasting, high-quality relationship, because each one of those relationships turned into multiple transactions or referrals. And it was easier to stay in contact with those people than constantly reacting. What they sort of taught themselves was that the electronic model of business isn't necessarily the best model for every business. And I think that's a lesson that when for some companies, when you get that, it does give you a sense of freedom to focus more on the quality than the quantity of the business.
Yeah, and I think you just summarized this whole debate perfectly. Is it a question of more versus better? Obviously, technology allows us to do more, but not necessarily any better. and having personal relationships allow us to be better and provide better, but we can't, we're obviously limited in how much we can do. So it becomes this balance of more versus better.
Well, I just use my personal experience. I know that there's tons of examples out there, and there's tons of ways in which we could pursue more, or we could pursue better and still be successful. But my personal experience is pretty simple. I'm a small entrepreneur. I suppose, in a way, I'm in the gig economy, if you will. And I don't have a logo. I don't worry about how much traffic comes to my website. I haven't bought SEO or pay-per-click advertising in 15 years. I fill my calendar quite nicely. I make a phone call or an email or a text a day, and I have 150 people maybe in my so-called database. I don't even call it a database. I just call it basically my address book in my smartphone. And, for many people in the gig economy, that sort of scale allows me to have a great balance between high quality contribution and more than enough business to be satisfied. There's a book that has stuck with me for years. I don't even remember when it came out. I think it was in the 90s, but it was called Rework, and it was by a software firm in Massachusetts. And the basic question in the book was, do we want to get big or do we want to be great? And I'm not saying that getting big isn't a good idea. I'm simply saying that some companies don't ask that question. Some individuals don't ask that question. And so they shoot for big when they might be wanting really in their hearts to shoot for great. And so as we think about the role and the opportunities that we have today to scale our businesses and scale our careers, I do think we have to come back to that primary philosophical question. And for more people today than ever, I do see a little bit of the pendulum swinging back towards great relationships, great work, great sense of accomplishment, not just necessarily more of those things.
So if I'm a service provider, and generally service providers tend to be, either small to mid-sized businesses or even just independent contractors, solopreneurs, I don't have the resources of Amazon or Zappos, and I need to make sure I've got enough volume, so I can't necessarily provide all the greatness. So what are some things that I can do if I'm sort of in that situation to find that balance and set myself up for success?
Well, I think that some of the core principles, and we might call them old fashioned principles in a lot of ways, remain true today. The vast majority of business for solopreneurs is going to come from people they already know. And, I think years ago I made an offhand remark that stuck, which is, we spend thousands or millions of dollars trying to find people we don't know, and we don't spend pennies staying connected to the people we do know. And what I would suggest is that in many ways, your next sale or your upsale or the ability to do a little more or increase your revenue doesn't necessarily have to come from someone new. It could come from someone who's already highly satisfied and highly trusts you and does have more needs, but we may not be spending enough time with them. So I'm a very, very big advocate of our sphere of influence. I'm a very big advocate of talking to 3 people a day, 2 of which you already know. Maybe one is a client or a past client, and just calling. And it doesn't have to be a sales call. Just or sending an email that just says, "How are things? Is there any way I can be of help?" And let that question open up a conversation. The second person you might want to talk to would be a peer. I regularly just talk to peers. What's going on? What are you seeing? How are things? What are you reading? Do you have any suggestions for me? I have learned more from people who I stopped thinking of as competitors years ago and just thought of people working in the same direction I'm working in my industry or outside of my industry, than having to come up with another ad. I'd rather have that call than to come up with another marketing scheme. And then the third person that I might want to talk to on a regular basis might be just someone new, just someone that is, I guess you'd call a prospect, and not try to do anything more than say, if we were to work together, what would be helpful to you? How could I add to your journey or help you get closer to whatever you're trying to accomplish? And oftentimes, what we'll find in all three of those simple conversations, and you can do them any way you want. They could be done through a call or a text, or they could be done through even social media interactions. But what I find in all three cases is this very old lesson I learned when I first started out, which is you rarely talk your way into a sale, but you sure can listen your way into a sale. And we're so worried about what to say every day that we sometimes forget that if we just listen, we know exactly how to add value, and that value is something that's also for us an opportunity to grow our revenue.
So in looking forward, there's constant talk of new technologies that are coming, which leads to the famous four-letter word of disruptors. So how do you see this impacting the future, especially for service professionals?
So the funny thing about so much disruption today is that I actually think it's a misnomer. I find most of the so-called disruption out there is really just distraction. And I don't say that to be sort of flip about it. There are some things that are definitely innovative or disruptive, if you will, of the way we used to do things, but they're really quite rare in many cases. And so we have to be careful that things that are hailed as disruptive aren't just distractions that are taking our eye off of the ball, off of our plans with our clients for the work we need to do for the reasons we want to do it. I've loved to use this funny statistic. So people love to say that Amazon has disrupted the world of retail. Well, the truth is that yes, Amazon is a huge percentage of online commerce. I think it's over 50% at this point. Whatever the number is, it's gigantic, but it's still a tiny percent of all retail. It's less than 10 or 11% of all retail in the United States as well. So, quite frankly, people selling stuff are doing just fine, even though Amazon has disrupted some people's ability to sell things. It hasn't destroyed a market. Well, we have to be careful in any industry, whether it's a service industry or a product industry, that we don't get confused between an innovative competitor, which is great, and our own plans and our own strategies. And so I don't worry so much about disruption, because I believe that the sort of antidote, if you will, to disruption is to remember that relationships will be able to go through changes. I mean, I used to do all my work by phone, and then I did all my work by email, and now I use the computer to do interviews online like this, or to post on social media. The changes in technology didn't actually disrupt anything. They actually enhanced all of those opportunities. So don't get too worried about that concept of disruption. It's very, very infrequent that true disruption changes everything. And it might happen. I certainly can't predict it. But in the meantime, 90% of our growth opportunity, or let's say 95% of our growth opportunity, depends on us sort of sticking to our own plans, having enough confidence and faith that we are our competitive advantage. We are able to make things happen in a complex, diverse marketplace, and nobody's going to corner the market. I'll just again go back to real estate. There are a lot of models that are being called disruptive today, but even if they quadrupled their volume, they wouldn't have 15% of the market or 20% of the market. That leaves 80% of the market for all the rest of the wonderful practitioners in real estate to, execute on their business strategies and create good careers and create good outcomes. So I think we have to just keep some of these things in perspective and not let them get us off track, distracted again from what we're still capable of doing in ever changing marketplaces.
So maybe the future is not as bleak as everybody wants us to believe.
Oh no, the future continues to be exciting. I think the future is much more determined by our own actions than any new competitor, new technology, new model, even new regulation. Funny thing is, I remember an old phrase that Jim Rohn used to say, and he used to say, if you want to know what the future is going to be like, I can tell you. He would say it's going to be kind of just about like it's always been. Things will change, and there will be some opportunities found and some opportunities lost, but by and large, things are going to kind of always be the way they've always been. And I watch people today continue to be super successful using every new innovation that comes out. And I also watch people today be super successful using very little more than their smartphone and maintaining a core set of very valuable relationships. It's not either or. It is all of the above that, for me, continues to remind me that I don't lack for opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Matt, for taking the time to be on the show today. It's very insightful and inspirational, as always.
I appreciate it. It's great to share these kinds of ideas, and I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to contribute.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all next week.
This was the Philip Gagnon Show. Be sure to visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Philip Gagnon Show and join in on the conversation. Access the show notes and discover some fantastic bonus content. The Philip Gagnon Show.